Good evening, everyone. My name is Stafna Rabinovich, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the Giller Book Club, the fourth in a series of 14. Please check our website for the complete list and register every month. You really don't want to miss a single one. Also, please make sure to have your Zoom on a side-by-side view for the best possible experience. Tonight, it is my profound pleasure to introduce you to our interviewer, Kamal Al-Solaylee. Kamal was one of our jurists in 2018, so he knows the prize really well. He is the author of Intolerable, a memoir of extremes, which was shortlisted for the Writers' Trust Hilary Weston Prize for Nonfiction, and the winner of the Toronto Book Award. He also wrote Brown, What Being Brown in the World Today Means to Everyone, which was a finalist for the Governor General Literary Awards and the winner of the Shaughnessy Cohen Prize for Political Writing. He was previously a theater critic at the Globe and Mail, and over the past 2 decades, has written on books, the performing arts, politics for the Walrus, the Toronto Star, the Quill Enquirer, and many notable other publications. Right now, he's a professor of journalism at Ryerson University. Kamal will be interviewing Michelle Good, the author of the spellbinding novel, 5 Little Indians, longlisted for the 2020 Scotiabank Giller Prize. There will be lots of fascinating questions and a reading, and if you'd like to join in the conversation, please feel free to submit a question using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please, join me in welcoming Kamal and Michelle.
Thank you so much, Daphna. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I am absolutely honored to be here tonight and to facilitate this conversation with the one and only Michelle Good. Let me start with a kind of somewhat of a formal introduction, Michelle, if you don't mind, just for anyone who doesn't know you. I'm just going to read the official bio. Michelle Good is a writer of Cree ancestry and a member of the Red Pheasant Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. She obtained her law degree after 3 decades of working with Indigenous communities and organizations. She earned her MFA in creative writing at UBC while also practicing law, and she won the HarperCollins UBC Prize for Best New Fiction in 2018. Her poems, short stories, and essays have been published in magazines and anthologies across Canada, and she lives and writes in South Central British Columbia. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
It's a pleasure to be able to get a chance to talk to you about a book that I've been living with for quite some time now, and I have lots of questions. So we'll dive right in. Michelle, in a few minutes, we'll dive into the book and the stories of the characters in the book, the 5 characters in the title, and there are a couple more as well, but we'll focus on them. But I think the story I want to start with, and the story I think most of our viewers would like to know more about, is your own story as a writer, your own journey into writing. So it's clearly that it's not that one day you decided, oh, I'm just going to go to UBC and do the MFA. You've been writing for a long time. By the way, when you went to the UBC, and you certainly made an impression. But maybe we can begin with sort of this sort of journey towards becoming an author after 30 years or so of working in the law.
Well, I kind of did just one day decide that I was going to go and do the MFA, but it was after a lifetime of wanting to write. I started writing when I was one of those little nerd kids walking around with a journal under my arm from the time I was about 12 years old. And just was, I think, sort of naturally predisposed to observing and considering and writing it down. And I've been writing poetry and short stories for years, but I have a very small profile, if you will, as a writer prior to this book coming out, and mainly because, I was a single mom and I was practicing law and I was getting a second degree and, I had a pretty busy life. But I firmly believe that life is not a dress rehearsal and the things you dream of, you should do. And law school was one of those. I graduated law school at 43. I went to law school at 40 after all those years of working with Indigenous organizations. And then in 2014, graduated from the MFA program. But for many, many years, I wanted to and threatened to write this book. And although I don't know that I really had the characterization or the sense of what this book was going to be, I knew I was going to write it. And that was actually why I went to the MFA program, was to write this very book. By the time I got into the program, I knew what I wanted to write, and my thesis was the first and terrible draft of the novel.
I wouldn't say that because
oh, you didn't see the first draft.
Okay. Well, listen, I didn't see the draft, but I have some insider information on the later drafts because you and I are published by HarperCollins. So
Yes.
my connection is the only time that being a writer actually pays off. You actually know some editors and at publishing houses. So I approached Jennifer Lambert, who I'm sure you know. I know you were edited by Janice later in the process, but I approached Jennifer and said, hey, Jennifer, I'm speaking to Michelle on Monday. What insider information can you tell me? And do you mind if I can read you what she wrote?
Oh, dear goodness, I think I'm going to be embarrassed, but go ahead.
No, I don't think you need anything to be embarrassed about. So here's what Jennifer said. We first read Five Little Indians on submission for our HarperCollins UBC Prize for Best New Fiction. Michelle's characters were alive with humor and love, an unbreakable sense of community despite their experiences. The novel struck us immediately as resonant and necessary in revealing the legacy of residential schools and also what it means to be a survivor. Here's the bit you may not know. It was our unanimous winner.
Oh.
So this is the jury editor, sorry, the fiction editors at HarperCollins, and it was a unanimous editor. And I know from talking to Jennifer that they're very proud of the work you've done and to be your publisher. So maybe having put you on the spot like this, we kind of move to the book itself. Before we start talking about the book, I thought it would be lovely to hear you read from it.
Sure.
So please grace us with a quick reading from the book.
I would be happy to. Yeah, and I'm just going to lead up to it. It's a short reading, so I'll just lead up to it a bit. This is when one of the characters, her name is Lucy, has just had a baby, and she's experienced what many Indigenous women experience in the form of birth alerts. So her friend Clara, the inimitable Clara, helps her escape from the hospital so they don't have to face the social worker again. Clara is living in a tiny little studio apartment, and now there's Clara and Lucy and the baby, and so it's a bit of chaos.
Okay, well, I'm going to disappear. I'll be back when you're done.
Okay. Clara returned at midday to find Lucy frantically trying to calm a screaming Kendra. Lucy looked at Clara, panicked. She rocked the baby faster and faster, desperate to calm her. What's wrong? What do I do? Geez, stop rocking her so hard. You're freaking me out. Clara dug through the basket where she dumped all the stuff they'd brought home from the hospital. She grabbed a little booklet with a picture of some rich white lady giving her baby a bottle. Do's and don'ts of feeding your bundle of joy. Here, she said, give me the baby. You read. Clara started rocking the baby, trying to stay calm. Lucy flipped the pages, reciting the headings. Formula, breast milk, bloating, gas. Gas! I bet she has gas. Okay, genius, but what do we do about it? Lucy flipped another page and was visibly relieved by the illustration of a mother burping her baby. Hand her over. She took the baby from Clara's arms and carefully turned her, laying her against her shoulder, and rubbed her back gently as the baby wailed. And then the baby burped so loud and deep, it froze Clara and Lucy in position for a second or two before they both howled with laughter. Lucy continued massaging Kendra's back, and she emitted a few more pint-sized burps. Holy, she sounded like some big beer-guzzling guy, Clara said, still giggling. Lucy smiled, shaking her head, relieved to have Kendra finally settled and dozing. Hey, can you wipe the puke off my shoulder? Clara sat down and rustled through her bag. I have limits, woman. Once the baby was sleeping again, Clara motioned Lucy into the tiny kitchen, where they would talk quietly without waking Kendra. Lucy whispered, "What's up?" Clara reached into her shirt pocket and pulled out 2 cards, a driver's license and a social insurance number. "Who is Carrie St. Marie?" Lucy looked at her friend quizzically. "And why do you have her ID?" Clara flipped the driver's license on top of the social insurance card and made a face. "That's you." Lucy grabbed the license and stared at Clara's picture. "What the hell?" Clara looked skyward with a feigned angelic eye roll. "I told you there are perks to being a criminal." "You're not a criminal. You just sell fish for people." "Tell it to the judge." Lucy grabbed Clara's sleeve and pulled hard. "Anyway, what the hell? I got a set in the works for you two. Should be ready tonight. You're my sister, Bunny St. Marie, with a baby, Honey St. Marie. What for? I don't need this. I have ID." Clara sighed. "Lucy, sometimes you are so damn dense." Offended, Lucy looked away. "Give me a break. I just had a damn baby." Clara gently pretended to throttle her. "Look, we're going to the welfare office tomorrow. You're my sister-in-law. Your husband died while you were pregnant. I'm here to help you with the baby. We're going to get on welfare." "What? You hate those welfare people." "Yeah, well," Clara motioned to the baby, "I love her more."
Oh, that is awesome. And can I just say that when I grow up, I want to be Clara. Like this, my ambition in life is to become a Clara. I know she's like 30 years younger than me, but I think I still have some like goals, and I want to be a Clara in my circle of friends. But I'm so glad you read from this piece because it actually captures so many of the, or it foreshadows a lot of the conversations I hope we'll have in the next 40 minutes or so. Motherhood, the joy that these characters who have had such an unfortunate history can find in the camaraderie and the ingenuity and the ability. We're going to talk about survival later on, so I think that sets the scene beautifully. But maybe I'm going to be sort of more. I'm going to start from the outside in, and I read somewhere. I've been googling, you a lot for the last week, and I've read everything that you've ever said to any journalist in Canada. And there's a quote from you, I think from the CBC, that said you didn't want to write a factual diatribe. People learn better from a story. Now you have this
Absolutely.
low experience, and this could have been a nonfiction book quite easily. Tell us about story and why did you want to choose? Why did you decide to write it as a novel, first of all?
Well, there's a lot of layers in the answer to that question. And one of the layers is this is how we taught traditionally Indigenous people. We taught through story.
Mhm.
And the concept of story or the idea of story in the context of oral history and oral tradition is so different from the way we normally think of story as to entertain, to elucidate, to while away our time on the bus or whatever we do when we're reading. Oral tradition is the basis of social institutions. And so that is the way that we taught. And so I thought, as I was thinking about planning this book, I thought, the best way to reach out to people is in a story, right? Rather than citing facts and figures, rather than expressing the rage that I feel about this whole legacy, right? But just putting it out there. And one of the reasons that I did it this way is when I was thinking about it, I thought, why is it that I want to write this? Really, why is it that I want to write this? And really, it was in response to something that I've heard too many times in my life, and that is, why can't they just get over it? Okay. And it seemed to me that in terms of raising the consciousness of people about really the legacy, the lasting impact of this generation upon generation upon generation, right? It can only be told by putting examples in front of people. And that's what I chose to do. And so that's what I set out to do. I set out to answer that question. And I chose fiction for those layered kinds of reasons. And also because I felt like fiction was a safe place
Oh,
for the
okay.
reader, right?
For the reader. Okay.
For the reader, because it's fiction. And
Mhm.
fiction, as we all know, can be powerfully true. But if anybody was walking into this book, they were free to say, well, it's just fiction. It's just fiction. I don't have to, have any kind of feelings about this because it's just fiction. But I had enough faith in it that the book would grab them, and then they would understand that it's more than fiction. But that I would grab them in a kind way, which I think is very important. It's one of our traditional teachings is kindness. And, so I think that's an important aspect of it as well.
And you and assume you also write to be read as well. You'd like people to pick up the book and read, and maybe a book of fiction is an easier introduction for people who are coming new to some of these issues.
Well, I mean, if you look at the size of the Truth and Reconciliation Report, which it necessarily had to be, there's no question, but how many people really can we realistically expect that are going to read the TRC report, are going to read anything more than the calls to action, really? And but I wanted to humanize these survivors, right? I wanted to just, make them people so that we're not statistics, we're humans, right? Yeah. So.
Well, I guess that brings me naturally to something I'm going to ask you, is that you not only did you decide to tell it as fiction, but you decide to tell it in this sort of braided structure from multiple point of view. We have, the title that sort of gives it away in a way. We have 5 central characters at the heart of this book. Although, when I count Maria, it probably 6, but the people who are survivors of the residential school. I actually I really would like to talk to you about the novel structurally and about the craft of building a story through multiple narratives and through multiple point of view, because there is a certain kind of trying to make sure that each character lives and is believable and is all right, and they're not sort of melding into each other. So tell me a little bit about that decision.
Well, the decision about the braided narrative, and it's really interesting because I notice in some reader reviews, very few, but some reader reviews, they respond quite negatively to the braided thing. They say it's not linear. And that was one of the reasons I didn't want to write a linear story, because that's not the way we tell stories, right? The sort of linear A, B, C, D is not the way. And, from my own understanding of our traditional or our storytelling traditions. And so, plus I also I saw through the writing of Louise Erdrich how the braided narrative is so powerful in terms of bringing in that essence of oral storytelling, of oral history, okay? And how effective it can be in bringing multiple stories to the fore in an effective way. I mean, I don't, suggest that I'm anywhere near Louise Erdrich. She's my queen. I just love her writing. So that was one of the reasons that I chose to take the braided route and the non-linear route. But the other thing too was that when I developed the ideas about these individual characters, they started not as people, they started as things that happen to residential school students. And what from my experience, I know what the psychological harms are of that Indigenous people and survivors had. And that was a real objective of this book, was to demonstrate the different types of lasting psychological injury. And right. And so I needed more than one character to be able to do that, right? But not only that, but I needed multiple characters in order to show that strong sense of community that you've referred to, or somebody referred to, that camaraderie. And although that seems like a light way of saying it, that residential school students, they in the school and out of the school, they they were close. They were each other's protectors, survivors.
Right.
They stood up for each other. They fought for each other. You know, in some schools, little kids, like my mom, she was 9 when she went to residential school, and she didn't speak a word of English. And you know, her brothers helped her a little bit, but I am aware of other incidents where kids would go to the school and they wouldn't speak a word of English, and the other students would give them like a little glossary, okay, of how to say yes or no, or, you know, just the very, very simple words, so that they wouldn't get beat up because they were being beaten for speaking Cree, okay, so, or beaten for speaking their particular Indigenous language. So they don't speak English. They're asked a question in English. They answer in their own language and they get hit. So the kids would come together like that to protect the newbies, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I mean, that comes across very clearly in the early chapters, particularly around Kenny and Howie. And I love the fact that it seems to me, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, is that you made a deliberate decision not to spend too much time at the residential school in the narrative, but really trace the psychological impact over generations. And it's almost like you're saying, well, we know what happened at the residential school, but let's now look at what came next. In a way, maybe if I'm reading that wrong, please correct me. But
no, absolutely, you're not, because that was the point. This isn't
sorry, guys, this will happen every now and then with Michelle. Michelle,
am I back?
no, your voice is back. Yes, yeah, you're back now. Yeah, sorry, we missed that. Can you repeat that?
Okay, all right, I'm back. Sure. What was I talking about? Because now I'm distracted.
We're talking about
what was your question?
Well, I think we're just talking about, you know, how you made the decision not to spend too much time at the, you know, narrative of, you know.
Oh, yes.
Within
so what the point of that is that it's not about the school. The book is not about the school, and whatever I put in about the school was just so that there was a sufficient foundation so that people could understand how kids, you know, were released from the school, so they could understand the types of abuses that were experienced there, that they could understand, like with little Howie, you know, when he's not even from that area and he gets dragged off to the school, like to give that sense of powerlessness and in the whole experience. And then, but the whole point of the book was not about the school. And that's why there's very little about the abusers too. It's not their story.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's the story is the survivors, and it's about when they hit the street running with nothing, you know.
Like literally nothing, because once they age out of the system and they, you know, or escape, they just, you know, if they escape, they escape. But if they age out of the system, they just sent with a couple of bus tickets and say, you're on your own. Here's Vancouver or something. And somewhere else, I also read. I'm sorry if that feels that I'm just, you know, I've been spending a lot of time sort of tracing your footprint on the internet, but you described something that I thought was fascinating, that you didn't think of yourself as a creator, but as a conduit to these characters.
There were times. I mean, I put a lot of work into this book. It took 9 years to write, but I think because I was with these characters for so long, but very quickly, they took on life. They took on their own life, their own energy. And very often I felt like I was transcribing, right? That I was hearing their stories, and that might just come from my own experience with, you know, my entire cohort basically are residential school survivors, right? But particularly Clara, okay, I would be, you know, working away and I'd be writing dialogue for Clara, and I would hear her. She had a very distinct voice, and she would say, I wouldn't say that, right? I wouldn't say that, or, you know, yeah, like that, right? And I could just feel the presence of these kids, and they became in many ways like my kids, right? And I feel protective about them, and they they still make me cry from time to time when I read about them because they do. They just feel like my kids.
But let me tell you, from a reader's point of view, yes, they make us cry, but they made me laugh so much at so many different places. And I want to get to that joy aspect very soon. But I noticed that Maisie's story was told in the first person, almost as a kind of in opposition to everyone else's. And I'm just wondering, like, as from a writer's point of view, why did you make that decision, and what purpose does it? I mean, I'm curious because it's the only one that, although there's part of Kenny that at the end of his life in the first person,
yeah. And the reason with Kenny, I'll start with Kenny, was because I really wanted to put the reader on alert that something intense is happening here.
Mm-hmm.
And also with Kenny, nobody else could know what was going on at that moment but Kenny, right? And so that's why that had to sort of move into the third person, or I mean the first person. But with Maisie, the reason that I chose, and it was not an easy choice because it is a jolt, right, for a reader to go from, third person to go into first person. But the reason I did that is that I wanted to emphasize how alone she was, that she was living two lives. One, being the Maisie that everybody depended on, the strong Maisie, Maisie that everybody looked for when they left the school, and, all of that. And underneath that facade was this broken, self-harming, girl with an obsession to replay her trauma, which is a very common thing with trauma, is that people feel a compulsion to just keep going back to the type of trauma they experience because they think, or that they're going to find an answer there. And she was so alone that I thought the only way I can really tell her story is from inside her, so yeah.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't want to spend too much time on trauma because because I would like to emphasize survival, for example. I would like to emphasize how you have a very complex approach to survival. There's one exchange between Mariah and Clara that I sort of reread several times to make sure I got right. And and at some point, Mariah tells Clara, "There's more to life than surviving," and I think Clara says, "I'll survive my own way." And the term surviving and living in the world, not just living in the world as a person, but living as an indigenous person, the survival of traditions it's just played out in the novel, throughout the novel, in different variations. So maybe I'm going to get you to talk to me a little bit about what is survival to you, and how is it how do you see your characters? Because in many ways they survive, and in other ways they don't.
That's true. And, and I don't think that, survival is a yes, no thing. Did you survive? Yes or no? No, it's not that, because of exactly what you say, is that there are, and, this is something that I've said to survivors many, many times, and that is, some things you never get over, you just learn how to manage them. And all of these kids in my novel, they all had things that they never got over, and they all had things that they learned to manage to varying degrees of success. And I think there's another passage in the book where I think it's Clara who says, they call us survivors, but sometimes I think I didn't survive, I'm just still walking around. And and I think that again but it's not, I don't think that people feel that way every day. I think it's like anything else that you have, like I'm a survivor of the foster care system. I aged out right around the time these kids were aging out, with a nickel in my pocket, and it was sink or swim. Okay. And and so I have some traumatic memories as well, but I have days when I feel those things and days when I don't. But beyond survival, there is thriving, right? Beyond surviving, there is thriving. And some of these characters were able to move beyond survival into a full life where they have meaning and satisfaction one way or another. And some of them couldn't. And I think that's the reality.
Right. I mean, I love the relationship between Clara and Lucy, but I also I also love the role that Mariah has played in sort of making Clara live as an Indigenous. Like when she teaches her how to, trap lines. She teaches her how to give food to the ancestors. Like all the things that that has been erased from her identity. These things are so powerful because it is, and they play out throughout the they're of course specific to Indigenous experience, but the erasure of identity, the deliberate erasure of identity, is part of colonialism. No matter what, it just plays out in different ways in different places. I mean, at that particular phase, or that particular part of the novel where Clara technically goes to heal from a bullet wound, but it's a different idea of healing altogether. She gets more healing than she bargained for, probably. Would you say that?
Well, that's why she says, in that one very important scene that you're referring to, where she says, I survived my own way, is, just before that, Mariah is saying to her, I feel your suffering. And Clara says, oh, my shoulder's almost better, right? Just resisting all of this, right? And but then finally it just breaks. She's just broken down by uncompromising love from Mariah, non-judgmental, uncompromising love. And and she talks about Lily and the impact of that, and she's then able to overcome the terrible oppression of Sister Mary referring to Indigenous traditions as devil worship, right? There are so many people that were taught that their own ways of being was devil worship, right? And I really wanted that in there, right? That healing comes from our traditional ways of being, right? Our traditional ways of looking at the world, embracing the world. And so that's, that's
the beginning of the healing process. While we're on the subject, like I really want to spend some time talking about the joy in this book.
Yes.
There is just so much love, and I want to start a petition to give George and Vera their own book, their spin-off, please, George and Vera. I want a spin-off starring George and Vera, if you please, because they're adorable. And also, I mean, John Lennon the dog is just like we have to set something in the background, like go back in time, and we know more about John Lennon the dog. But I wanted, the joy in this. I have to say, it surprised me in places, because like many readers, and when I read what the book is about, I'll be honest, I said, here we go, I better brace myself for this really heavy-hitting book, and I'm going to be in tears and going to have to put it down and read it. But I kept reading because there is the scenes, I mean, like the scene you read for us at the hospital, it is ingenuity, it's camaraderie, it's she's quite a character, Claire, as I said. And I love that the book doesn't shy away from the trauma, doesn't shy away from how abusive the system has been, but also finds these moments where they allow these women, or this group of people, because there's also men and women, just to find love and to find connection. So you just tell me a little bit about that.
Well, life goes on. Life goes on. And, we carry trauma and all of those kinds of things, but life, I don't even know how to say that, what I'm trying to say. Life goes on. You're walking down the street and you're trying to, you're thinking about what happened in the school, but then you run into somebody, and they tell you a joke and you laugh. I think it would be sort of one-dimensional if you didn't include in these stories the fact that there is joy and love and that there are unbreakable bonds between people, just like there is in real life. I don't think that there is a single life out there, no matter how miserable, where there isn't 1 second of joy somewhere. And, so I think that's what, as I said, these characters became real human beings to me. And so that was necessary. But also, we're really funny people. Our indigenous, like we call it Indian humor, right? But our humor is just so good, right? I mean, like the kind of humor that you see in that passage that I just read. And but it's also very interesting because, they talk about, there's another scene in the book where Lucy and Clara are laughing about the time that Sister Mary got her habit stuck up in her underwear and everybody was looking at her underwear and, but how they take horrible things and they can make them funny, right? And it's, I think it's actually a survival technique, aside from the fact that we're just naturally funny people.
Well, I mean, you use, I was going to say, I mean, laughter is resistance as well, I think,
Yes.
and a way to rewrite the narrative. Sometimes, but definitely, I mean, I'm not in a minute doubting any way you just said, but I think for those who haven't read the book, I think they will be quite surprised to see that in the midst of all this and how there's some real suffering and there's some real issues. I mean, Kenny, we haven't even begun to talk about Kenny, unable to commit, unable to stay, the perpetual runaway in a way.
Kenny was not unable to commit.
Okay.
Kenny was just not able to sit still.
Well,
Kenny tried to escape and escape and escape and escape, and he continued for the rest of his life escaping from his demons. And I think the love story between Kenny and Lucy is really quite beautiful, because Lucy just accepts him because she knows, right? She knows what he went through, and that, after a period of time, and they have a child and so on, she knows that he just can't do sort of the conventional thing, right? That it hurts him too much. And so, so there's that. So, but he committed to that baby, and he committed to Lucy.
I think I said perpetual runaway, but maybe the commitment part is not. You're absolutely right. But there's another love story here with Clara and Lucy as well. I think to me, it is as paramount a narrative, a romantic narrative, as the one between Lucy and Kenny, because it combines sort of sisterhood with also, I mean, they're roughly the same age or a year or two apart, and yet she becomes a mother figure to Lucy.
Yeah. And Lucy, I mean, Lucy was so vulnerable and so naive and so, just this wide-eyed little kid. And I really wanted to express that too, because many residential schools were very remote. And, I think of, for example, the Port Alberni Indian Residential School. It was on an island, okay? And just as this one was sort of on an island, it was only accessible by water. And I really wanted to give the impression about how a child's entire life, from the time they're 5 or 6 years old, sometimes younger, is defined by the four walls of a residential school and the grounds. And how could you possibly be expected to even know, what a ferry is, or what a shopping mall is, a bus depot, a city bus? How can you know any of that, right? And that terrible vulnerability that came from the sequestration, if you will, of these little kids for 10 years of their lives.
I mean, it surprises me to still find out that that's within within our lifetime, you and I, and that I think the novel one point clearly makes it 1967 is a turning point when they're all in the east side of Vancouver, and definitely within my lifetime that was still quite common, that you just send 16-year-old to downtown Vancouver with nothing but a bus ticket and having lived the sheltered life that you described. So Michelle, I think there's a line that Howie says when when he insists on taking part in the class action suit and or tells his story, and he says it's about telling my story. And I can't help but thinking that this is also your voice is coming across here, and of the novel as a testimony, of this book as a testimony. I just wonder how you feel about that, of your book being in itself, even though it's fiction, is also a testimony.
It is a testimony. It is. It's exactly that. And, I raised that issue. I didn't want to go into a lot of detail about him, getting a settlement, but it's part of the narrative. It's part of the history. But I just had to have it in there to demonstrate what they had to go through, what survivors had to go through to resolve it legally. But also the important thing is that how he says in that dynamic, I'm here for the ones that couldn't be.
That's right. Yeah.
For the ones that didn't make it. That's why I'm here, for Kenny and for the others like Kenny, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think we've gone over and we're into.
I think we're into the question and
yeah.
So I have to. I just have to wrap here. My final question to you would be: it loops back to my starting point. For anyone watching, no matter what age they are or what they've been doing professionally in their life, who's sitting on a novel or a short story or a creative work, what would be your advice to them? What would you advise them to do?
If they're sitting on it, you mean, or they're thinking about
it? Thinking about it.
Do it.
But how? How? I mean, do you recommend, is the MFA a good route? It was a good route for you, obviously, but
yeah, for me, it was a good route because I didn't know how to write a novel. I had to learn how to write a novel. So for me, that was a good route to go. But the key thing is to just write, right? There's no mystery to writing. You just write, and then you may not like what you've written, but then you can work with it. Just do it. First novel released at 64 years of age. That's me. So don't give up. Just keep doing it.
You're an absolute role model and an absolute star. So just a gentle reminder, everyone, that you can put your question in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And we already received some, so I'm going to start by reading. We have a question from Janet Border here. How did the title come about, and were there any others in the running?
Oh my goodness, there were so many titles. There were only 2 other serious titles. One of them was Indian School, and that came to me because I was driving down the highway in Arizona, a secondary highway in Arizona, and I came to an intersection, and it was something an Indian School Road. And I just went, oh my goodness, right? And there was my title. And then, but before that, it was Angels in the Birch Trees, because I was focusing on Clara's spiritual experience in the birch trees. And then I decided that I didn't want Indian School because it suggests that it's about the school, and it's not about the school, it's about the kids. And so me and my my comrade, who talked a lot about this book before I submitted it anywhere, we just went back and forth for days. Maybe this, maybe that, maybe this. And then one day I was just sitting there minding my own business, and Five Little Indians came, just like that. Yeah. And the reason I chose that was because of that horrible racist song that has been used for any person of color, like all different manner of people of color, to give, not only am I saying I've got 5 little Indians that I'm going to tell some stories about, but this is a story that that rises in our society from a place of profound racism.
Right. Yeah, and in a way you reclaimed that title from that little song. With, I know even when Agatha Christie's novel, they had to be retitled as and then there were none. But you mentioned birch trees, and funny enough, the second question relates to that. We have a question from Lorraine Johansson. She first of all wants to thank you for writing this novel. She feels like Five Little Indians has given so much to readers, but she would like to ask you about birch trees. I felt the stories had a connection to the trees and nature on the cover and throughout the book. So maybe.
Well, there's an interesting thing. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but birch trees are indigenous to Canada. Maple trees are not. And birch trees have a real medicinal significance in traditional indigenous medicine. It's the source of a lot of medicines. And so I didn't decide about birch trees. I just had Clara walking through the birch trees, and then they just kept coming back and back and back because of what birch trees are in terms of the holders of real medicine. And that one scene when the spirit is in the jail cell with Clara,
Right.
and her pointing to the little birch tree, even here, and she says, even here in the city, there it is. There's the medicine, right? And so that's why the birch trees.
Right. Well, it looks like the birch trees are attracting a lot of attention, and the cover, because we have another question about the cover here from Cynthia Stewart. She also loved your book, but she would like to ask, do you have anything to say on the about the cover of the book? It's interesting, creative, and I looked at it for a long time. I think it's captivating and sad and exceptional.
It is exceptional, and I have a couple of things to say about that book, or about the cover. One is that I just love the cover too. It's like my little characters there are walking in an upside down world. That's how I see it. But oddly, I didn't have any input in the cover other than rejecting another cover and saying I wanted something that was more representative of the gravitas of what's between the covers, right? And suggested birch trees, maybe a photograph so you can see the shimmer of birch trees. And this is what came back. And I literally gasped when I opened my email and I saw that. And the reason for that, and maybe I'm oversharing, but my son passed away, my only child, while I was writing this book in 2013. And he passed away on the full moon, and it was the pink moon. And so when that cover came in, it was like, Jay's here. He's with me. He's walking with me through the journey of this book. And I was just so comforted by it. It was just really awesome. So yeah,
that's
my
beautiful.
book is
Oh my God. There's a story behind the cover. There's a story behind the book, but a story behind the cover as well. And I'm really sorry to hear. I did not realize that loss of your son. And it is an exquisite cover, I have to say. We have another question here, Michelle, if you don't mind. We still have time, so we have lots of questions actually. So we try to go through them quickly. It took you 9 years to write this book. A question from Janet: what a labor of love. Are you working on anything else right now?
I am. I think that history has grabbed me, right? I mean, I've always loved history. I've taught history. And, one of the major issues in understanding Indigenous reality is that history is not written by Indigenous people. And so I'm taking a very important time in Canadian history, 1885, and where there was a so-called massacre at Frog Lake. And then there was, I won't go into a lot of detail, but it's looking at the perspective of that experience and the things that happened after that from the perspective of a woman of my great-grandmother's generation. My great-grandmother was born in the 1850s, and never saw a non-Indigenous person until she was in her teens. So I'm trying to write that experience, and from that perspective, without going into, hours of discussion, that's about all I can say. So, but that's to be my thing, is retelling history from a different perspective.
Okay, we have something to look forward to in the coming few years, I guess. We have another question from Vandy Britton. How do you develop your how did you develop your characters? Are there aspects of people you know within them?
There are aspects of people I know, but not intentionally, right? You have to understand that I started working with Indigenous organizations when I was a teenager, okay? And so everybody that I was working with, living with, my entire cohort were residential school survivors. So, you know, the nature of that experience was I didn't have to learn it. I lived it. And so it's about that, I don't know, class of people, if you will. But that's how I developed them, was just based on the reality that is second nature to me, the reality that I understand in that way.
Right. I mean, you have been doing that work as well from a legal point of view. So you've come across people, and how the people we meet in life end up in our books is an alchemy that no one actually knows how that happens. It just is it just some kind of magic happens. We have a question from Sue, and she had planned to be published by 50, and today's is her 51st birthday, so happy birthday, Sue. And not even a first draft. But my question was what advice you had. But now I just want to say, her question was what advice you had, but I guess I preempted that by my last question.
Okay.
But I just want to say how lovely and warm you are, and I wish we could have tea. I felt like I wanted to read that to you.
Well, here's me giving you a virtual hug, and don't give up. Just keep writing. That's all it is. Just keep writing.
Keep writing. Absolutely. You can't edit if you haven't written. I always tell my students, you can't edit if you haven't written. You have to write first and then edit and go back. We have a question from Erin Atkinson. Can you talk a little bit about Mariah? She was a very powerful character, and I really want to echo this question because I was really transfixed by her.
Yeah. Well.
Uh-oh, we have the freezing thing again. Oh, sorry, guys. When we're setting this up, we're told not to use microwaves while we're... Sorry, Michelle, you're freezing again.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Am I back?
Are the dogs using the microwave again?
Okay. No. So I intentionally created Mariah to be a person who had been raised in a traditional home and had not experienced the residential school experience. So she was an untouched human, if you will, from the perspective of, you know, residential school abuse and so on and so forth. She was unsullied by that colonial aspect of Canadian history. And she had all of the training. I did a presentation to a bunch of therapists, and they said, she's like a therapist without the training. I said, excuse me, she's a therapist with, you know, millennia of training, right? And that's who Mariah is, and why she needed to be in the book was how our traditions, if not messed with, that we will be whole forever, right? So, yeah.
In many ways, she's a keeper of the tradition as
That's
well.
right. Absolutely, a knowledge keeper and a medicine woman. Yeah, a healer.
Right. We have comments, but I think they're so lovely. I would love to read them for you, if you don't mind. We have a comment from Louise Kilby. I'm so glad that I was able to sit and listen to you today. I've spent most of my adult life working with Indigenous peoples and communities, and have some understanding of the impact of residential school. I think this is a book I can recommend to others who have no idea about this part of Canadian history. The book reads like there should be another, and I'm wondering what you have in mind, but I think you already responded to that part of the question. And again, from Janice McKay, not a question, but a comment. So this is referring to your idol, Louise Ergic. She read her first over 25 years ago. I was thrilled to hear you love her as well. I love Five Little Indies as much as I love The Beat Queen. Thank you for sharing this wonderful story with us. I thought you might like that one.
I do like that one.
Let me just see if I can go in. Another, it's a question from Arlie Greenwood. I truly believe that our high school should be reading this book in curriculum. Actually, it's something I was going to end up on, but I'm glad, Arlie, you preempted me there. Is this something you would support?
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, sometimes I think Mariah's chapter is pretty rough. But then I think, grade 12 students, they can find anything they want on the internet, right?
Right.
So I don't think that it would be too shocking or horrible. I know of one high school that is using it now, and they're giving the students the option to either read the Mariah chapter or not.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, I would love that. I
The
would just
Mariah
ask.
or the Maisie chapter?
Oh, sorry, the Maisie chapter.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you
Sorry.
think, wow, no, I just thought, no, I just thought, oh, okay, that is really, if they're upset about the Mariah chapter,
I don't want
then
them to read the book if they're upset about
they
the Mariah
haven't,
chapter.
they missed the plot completely. So it's the Maisie, and I can sort of, I can understand, but I think you see, as you said, you see a lot, far more graphic details and stories of relived trauma on the internet and in even in television that geared to young people.
Yeah,
Quickly, just go through. Have you been approached about movie rights? Because I also think it's incredibly cinematic. So
no comment.
no comment.
I
Okay.
can't.
No, don't say anything. Don't say anything. And I think we already spoke about Louise Erdrich, so I think we have covered all the questions. So it just leaves me to say, Michelle, what an honor it is to spend this hour with you in, virtually, but to spend several days reading and rereading your stunning book. I mean, I don't use that word lightly. It's a stunning read. It's a beautiful read. It's an essential read. And just going back into that question about the curriculum, I do genuinely believe this is a book that everyone in this country, in Canada, Turtle Island, however you choose to refer to it, should be, especially settlers like myself, should be not forced to read, but they should just pick it up and read it. And I do think they're going to have a wonderful surprise and a story full of love, humanity, and camaraderie. And again, I wanted to end up on the note about Clara and what personally, I just want to, I want to tell you just how much I love that woman and how much I've loved reading her story.
I love her too. I really do. I love them all.
You love them all? Do you love them all? You have favorites?
I don't have favorites because they're like my kids, and if I did, I wouldn't tell you.
No, but you love Clara. You gave Clara a lot of love and attention, and I mean they all do, but Clara is sort of, and she emerges as the kind of the voice for everyone and protecting.
Well, she is a person with a very important role in the story. There's no question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Before we go, I'd like to, I don't know if this is proper or not, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'd like to refer people to another book. It's called Genocidal Love, A Life After Residential School. Mm-hmm. And it's written by Bevan, Bevann Fox. And she has fictionalized thinly her own story as a residential school survivor. And it is a powerful, powerful read. And I really strongly encourage people to read it. I think these two books could be companion books.
Okay, I know what I'm reading next. All right, Michelle, again, thank you for the pleasure of your company and the pleasure of your book. And I look forward to the next one and the one after that and the one after that. But right now, I'm going to hand it over to Daphne, and I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to disappear.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. Daphne, over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both, Kamal and Michelle. Oh my gosh, I could listen to another hour. But thank you all for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed hearing from both Kamal, our pastor, and the long-listed author, Michelle Good. And I wanted to let you know that this interview will be available on our YouTube channel during the next couple of days. And please don't forget to join us on March 15th, when our next book club will be on consent, written by Annabelle Lyon, and the interviewer will be Ben McNally. So if you haven't subscribed to our book club mailing list, please do so. If you're already on the list, you'll get a registration link. And you can always visit our website for more information about our book club and our monthly master panels. Thank you so much. Good night.